Good evening, everyone. I'm Wally Bobkowitz, the Evanston City Manager. Thank you for joining us this evening for what is becoming an annual event where we spend a few hours talking about the preparation of the annual budget for the coming year. We are working right now on preparation for the fiscal year 2018 budget for the year beginning on January 1st. We are going to this evening kind of give you an overview of the budget process. Going to have the Assistant City Manager, Marty Lyons, give an overview of some of the budget issues we're facing. And then we're going to talk to each of the city department heads and get a sense of what's going on in their world with their budget. So there's a lot of ways for people to participate. We have probably 5 or 6 members of the public here with us this evening, so thank you all for coming. If folks here in the Civic Center wish to ask questions, we ask that you fill out a card, which Ms. Richardson over there has. Kimberly, why don't you raise your hand so people can see you? If you have a question, we'll be happy to take your questions. We'll answer the more general citywide questions at the beginning of the program and at the end of the program. And then as you have questions about the particular municipal departments, we'll take those when those department directors come up. For those of you at home, there's a number of ways for you to participate. You can call 311. We have extended hours this evening for people to call us and have it put in your questions, so we'll get them that way. You can text us through 311. You can send an email to 311@cityofevanston.org. You also can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. So if you have questions or comments through the city's Facebook page, through the city's Twitter account, we're live tweeting the event at City of Evanston 2. We're just like ESPN, where one channel's not enough. We have a City of Evanston 2 Twitter account, and we'll be tweeting highlights there. So hopefully that's a lot of opportunities for people to participate and ask questions. We'll do our very best to answer those questions. Let me emphasize this is a staff event that the city staff is putting on. This is not a city council meeting. The city council will receive the budget on Friday, October the 6th, and then we'll talk a little later this evening about the various opportunities the community will have to actually appear before the city council and provide their input on the actual proposed budget. All right, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Again, we're going to try to get this covered in about the next 2 hours. For those of you here in the Civic Center, we'll have the PowerPoint up on the screen and then have that as well on television. So as far as the agenda for this evening, we are going to talk a little bit about facts about the city, talk about the city's budget process, our revenue and expenditures and other funds, a brief overview of our capital projects, some current challenges we're having with the current fiscal year. We're here primarily to talk about next year, but we'll also talk a little bit about the current year as we finish up the current year. And then, of course, throughout the evening, we'll have questions from members of the public as well as discussion with senior city staff members. So some facts about Evanston for those of you who may not know. The city was first incorporated in 1863, so we've been around 150 plus years. We were first incorporated as a town. We are now a city since 1892. We are a home rule community. The abilities that we have are granted to us by the Illinois General Assembly under the Illinois State Constitution, which was last revised in 1970. So most powers for cities and villages in the state of Illinois come from the 1970 Illinois Constitution. The city of Evanston in 1951 had a vote of the people and decided to go from the strong mayor form of government to the council manager form of government. And so since 1952, then when the first city manager was hired, we have operated as a council manager form of government. So as the city manager, I serve as the chief executive of the organization. I report to the 9-member city council and the mayor. And they serve as the board of directors and policy setting body for the city of Evanston. About 7.8 square miles, about 75,000 residents. And again, we are divided up into 9 wards in the state of Illinois. Local governments there are townships, there are villages, and there are cities. And we are a city, and because we are a city, we have aldermen versus village trustees, and then those aldermen are elected by ward. So we have 9 aldermanic wards. Fun fact for many of you, and want to recognize Alderman Ann Rainey, who's with us here in the audience, the only remaining alderman who was here when we had 18 members of the city council. So Not the only living one, no, no, no. But still serving on the city council. So we went from, I believe it was in 1993, when we went from 18 aldermen to 9 aldermen. And certainly the city is fortunate to have a whole variety of assets, and certainly some of our large employers, Northwestern University, North Shore University Health System, President St. Francis Hospital, and Rotary International are all major employers here in the community. On city facts, covered some of these already, but 33,000 housing units, 147 miles of streets, 76 miles of alleys, 208 miles of sewers, and 5,600 streetlights. So from an infrastructure perspective, as a community, we're fairly dense at 7.8 square miles, but have a lot of things we take care of, and certainly that infrastructure, 75 parks, the lakefront, our community centers, lots of infrastructure to keep track of. City facts, as far as that infrastructure, police and fire, as we'll talk about later this evening, the lion's share of our general fund budget, 165 sworn police officers, 62 civilian personnel within the police department, 170 sworn firefighters that are based in 5 stations throughout the community, plus a headquarters office, 1,385 fire hydrants. And perhaps we can talk to our Public Works Agency Director, Dave Stonebeck, about the importance of those fire hydrants and the work we do every year to maintain them. Parking meters and transportation are always a big issue in Evanston. Transportation, mobility, 1,600 parking meters, 3,500 parking lots owned by the city, 3 parking garages, and 11 divvy stations. So the city of Evanston, along with the Village of Oak Park, are part of the divvy bike system, which is based here in Chicago. And so that's another way that we're getting people around. And finally, the library. The library operates slightly differently than the rest of the municipal departments. The library has a board which is appointed by the mayor. That board then appoints a library director, and she is responsible for the operations of the library. She'll be here later this evening, and we'll talk a little bit with her. There's the main library downtown, 2 branch libraries, 530,000 books and materials, and over 63,000 registered borrowers. So a very active and engaged area there. Next, we talked a little bit already about parks and recreation, 5 beaches, 7 recreation centers. So to think about a city our size and to consider that we have the Chandler Newburger Community Center, which is a general community center which has a variety of classes and indoor sporting events. The Ecology Center, which teaches our community, and our community comes together to talk about environmental ecology issues. The Noyes Cultural Arts Center, home of many important arts organizations. The Levy Senior Center, was relocated over 15 years ago to its current location in South Evanston. Fleetwood Jourdain Community Center, again, a multi-purpose facility. The Robert Crown Center, primarily known for its ice sheets, but also the other services, child care that's provided there. And our newest community center, the Gibbs Morrison Cultural Arts Center, which was opened a couple of years ago at Dempster Dodge. And then finally, when you look at infrastructure for the city, you have to talk about water. And being located on Lake Michigan, we not only provide water to the residents of Evanston, but we also provide water to the village of Skokie, to a consortium of now 5 communities known as the Northwest Water Commission, which is the villages of Wheeling, Arlington Heights, Buffalo Grove, Palatine, and those 4 entities together form the Northwest Water Commission, and then they have a customer in the city of Des Plaines. So we provide water there. We now have a contract in place to provide water to the villages of Niles and Morton Grove, which we hope to begin in early 2019, and we are in final discussions with the village of Lincolnwood. So we provide water to, I think it's about 400,000 residents in the greater area, 108 million gallons of water per day that are filtered, 147 million gallon pumping capacity per day. Average pumpage is 40.3 million gallons. So it's a big, big deal, our water operation. And again, our Public Works Agency Director, Dave Stonebeck, is here this evening. We'll talk a little bit more with him. So what is a budget? A budget's a legal document that serves as a government's financial operating plan, the financial and policy document for how the city provides services to the residents. It's a tool of communicating how taxes and other revenues are spent, And a budget really allows the community to provide input to the city council as they set that policy of the adoption of the budget on what the important issues in our community and how they should be properly addressed. We'll talk a lot tonight about our general fund. Our general fund is a general purpose fund, which funds our core city services, police, fire, street, park maintenance. As you can see from the slide, those departments are listed, but we also have enterprise funds, which provide for specific kinds of services. Water, sewer, solid waste, parking are all specific funds that are constituted to provide specific services. And then finally, we have the capital improvement fund, which is specifically for the capital improvement projects that we do. Other funds, special revenue funds, debt service funds, internal service funds, trust funds, all sort of separate bank accounts that we use to operate the city of Evanston. As we develop a budget, there are certain policies that we use. We have a budget reserve policy currently, which is 16.6% of the general fund, and perhaps the assistant city manager will talk a little bit more about that later as we move forward. We also try to make sure that we spend one-time money on one-time resources, and I think that's an issue as we look at this year's budget, Mr. Lyons. That's something we're going to need to talk about because as we're having some challenges, part of those challenges are coming from our decline of some one-time revenues, and we'll need to talk a little bit about that. Finally, a budget timeline. The parts that we're in now is as we are working with the city departments to get their feedback on the budget, and that part is coming to a conclusion. We are wrapping up the budget. This is really the last opportunity as we're getting citizen comment. We're also meeting with our employees and have done that over the last several days to get their input. So that will all lead to the preparation and presentation to the mayor and city council of a proposed budget on the first weekend of October. And then we'll talk more specifically at the end of the evening about the additional dates. But we're looking to adopt a budget on November 27th. All right. I don't see any initial questions. So the assistant city manager is here. I'm looking here at the slides. I'm wondering, perhaps, Marty, do you want to maybe just give some general comments? I know there's a lot of things toward the end of the evening that we'll talk about, but why don't you talk a little bit about your role, the staff that you're responsible for, the day-to-day operations, and perhaps just some general thoughts on where we are with not only the preparation of 2018's budget, but also as we're beginning to turn the corner on the end of the 2017 year.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Again, my name is Marty Lyons. I'm the Assistant City Manager and Chief Financial Officer. And many years ago, the city decided to combine those positions. If you looked at a lot of other communities, you'd have an Assistant City Manager and a separate director level as a Chief Financial Officer. And as a cost-saving measure, we combined those positions, and I've performed a variety of functions. Presently, I work on the city's finances as my main core duty, but also work with the economic development team and with community outreach, as well as providing support to the city manager on basic council meeting and council management, supporting the city council. This year's budget, as the manager noted, we have had some ups and downs, some that are external and some that are internal. The external ones, for the first time in 2 years, the state passed a budget. That's great news. The bad news is, as a part of them passing the budget, they took away a large amount of income tax dollars and then also put on a few additional fees to reduce some of our sales tax dollars as a part of their administration of the sales taxes. So they just put an administrative fee on collecting those dollars, both of which take away money from our general fund for basic services. On the internal side of things, as we'll go through, the city's budget is made up of ongoing services and revenues, but also one-time revenues and one-time services or projects. This year, we've had major fluctuations in what we call more of our one-time revenues in the form of permits, where there could have been more development, there could have been less. Each year, we have to project what we think the development will be, and this year we're going to be a little bit underneath on those projections, and we'll get into that. I don't want to steal too much thunder later in the slides, because we've addressed those issues in detail, and that's why this document's a really good one for anyone who wants to refer back to the city's budget year over year. Last year's would have our 2016 data. This year we have the 2017 data that we want you all to see so that when you ask questions about what we should do for 2018, you have a good knowledge base. With me tonight is the budget review team, Alex Thorpe, Kate Lewis-Lakin, Kimberly Richardson, and then we have Martha Logan and Patrick Deegan from our community outreach and all of our directors. Each year in June, we start our process for budget, and right now, as the city manager noted, we're in the budget production stage, and that's why we want input tonight. We have gotten input over the last 30 days from departments on what they think is going on, but we want to have input from residents on what their concerns are for the coming year so that we can have all of that together for the 2018 proposed budget that we'll deliver on October 6th.
So we talk about permits. Let's try to drill down a little bit to that. So these are building permits, right? That's the main concern that we have, not only in the current year, but also looking at the 18 budget?
Yes, and for any of you that have done permits, you hear them referred to as building permits all the time, but there's building permits, and then there's also permits associated with it, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning permits. We have smaller categories because in some cases, somebody has a building and they just like to do some electrical work. They're going to have an electrical permit, but perhaps they're not doing something that's going to change the footprint of the building or add an addition. So we have various categories of permits. They do track similarly. If we're down on building permits, the chances are we'll be down on the smaller permits as well. But for the most part, all of these permits that we'll be referring tonight refer to our building stock. They're not associated with right-of-way. They're not associated. We have a right-of-way permit. They're not associated with fire permits. These are our building and structural permits for the city.
So we've talked a little bit about permits. You mentioned the state of Illinois. So the state passed a budget. What did that mean for Evanston? And as we look at moving forward, what does that mean for the fiscal 18 budget?
The state of Illinois is on a July 1 through June 30th budget. So sometimes it's a little bit difficult to translate to our January 1st calendar year budget. When the state passed their budget, two major provisions were the reduction of the 2017-18 state year income tax distribution to cities. The state said clearly that they were going to reduce that by 10%, but not to worry, they were going to speed up the payments of the income tax to the city. Well, the city operates on what's called generally accepted accounting principles, and the state was making reference to cash distributions. We count the amount that the state is going to give us as soon as it's recognized, not when we actually receive it. So we didn't receive any accelerated payments from the state, and the net effect is we'll receive about a 5% reduction in our income tax for 2017, and then next year we're counting that they will not decide to make this a temporary situation in that we will end up being 10% down on income tax distributions going forward. Given the state of the state's budget, we think this is a safe bet. I also referenced that the state decided to increase the administrative fees for some of the state shared revenues to basically pay for the costs of services in the State Department of Revenue and Comptroller's Office to pay for their own salaries for the collection and tracking of those revenues, mainly state sales tax.
So we've talked about some big revenue sources. Let's just kind of finish up on the rest. Are we generally in good shape, you think, with the rest of the revenue sources, both current year and as we're looking toward next year?
The term I've used this year for our revenue sources is stable. There's been a lot of media recently about where we're at in the overall economy for the United States. And with some of those articles, it's noted quite often that cities lagged behind in the American recovery. And that's because some of our normal revenue sources, such as sales taxes, are being impacted by other reasons. Sales tax We have a telecommunications tax that's based on landlines, not based on necessarily all of the new products that are being used for telecommunications. So we have, in some cases, I will refer to them as stable revenue sources. Some people would say they're stagnant, but I think they're stable, and that's, that I will take that over declining revenue sources. We have also faced this last year, the good and the bad. Everybody remember the winter of 2017? No, because it was the nicest winter we've had forever. There wasn't much of one. We lost a bunch of utility taxes because of that, but Mr. Stonebeck and the Public Works Agency also didn't have as much snow expenses. So it was a net gain to the city. Getting back to the overall revenues, our one other declining revenue is our parking tickets. Our parking tickets are in the general fund because that's where the enforcement officers are. And I know that most residents wouldn't believe it, that we're actually collecting less in parking tickets, but that is the case.
And it's an order of magnitude. I mean, it is not just a couple of dollars.
We're talking about almost a 20% reduction on a $3 million revenue source, so $600,000 plus in decline in revenue, but we've had it offset with increases in parking meter revenues, because with the electronic meters and the pay boxes that are not pay by space, you can pay and don't have to go back to your car. Everyone has found those to be more convenient, and we have a lot more compliance and a lot less tickets, and that's good for keeping our sales tax revenue stable, good for keeping our downtown property values in great shape if we keep all of our businesses open, because people find that to be a good experience now in the downtown, not having to feed the meters if just through quarters or through a dollar coin. They can now use an app or use a credit card, and it's a lot more convenient process. As far as any other revenues, we're still stable on our vehicle, or what we would call our wheel tax, and our other utility taxes. We won't change those very much from year to year based on one warm winter. So those would be stable, and I'll end it with the one that everyone thinks of, and that's property taxes. Last year, we had a modest increase on property taxes to cover pension increases. The general fund, and we have a history on it, but the general operating levy has decreased since I've been here. So that's 9 years. We've decreased the general operating levy every year, sending more dollars to either pension or debt service. So for those purposes, that levy is actually going down, and we try to make up for that through our economy and having good economic development practices. So that would be the summary.
So that's the revenue side.
Yes.
So expenditures, clearly one outstanding issue we have is our labor agreements, that all of the labor agreements except for the police sergeants were expired on December 31st. Where do we stand with that, and how is that going to impact not only the current year budget potentially, but also moving forward?
All three of our largest agreements, that is police officers, International Association of Firefighters, all of our firefighting staff, and AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, to cover all of our non-sworn union staff. Those are the big three that are up, and they represent 75% of our staff and almost 70% of our wages. So that is a very large issue for us. We are in negotiations with all three. We are down to some very major points, but for the overall, a lot of our language not concerning economics is all done and settled, and we are trying to work through this budget process to negotiate a fair agreement with all of our units going forward for the next 2 to 3 years. We're even looking at trying to shorten up our agreements to take into account our concern over the lack of stability in the economy. Those agreements, until we settled them, we haven't paid anything. So if someone were to look at the monthly financial report, they would see that we might be under budget in a few areas for wages. But we owe those monies depending on how those contracts are settled. So if we agree to retroactivity, then we owe dollars back to whenever the last contract was put in place. And as part of the budget process and the labor negotiations process, we're working on the best deal for both the staff and Evanston residents to keep those costs manageable, but make sure we're a good place to work. So we have quality staff in all of those units.
I think another big expenditure issue that we're looking at, and we can talk a little later on with both the police chief and the fire chief, is overtime. And that balance of how we make sure that the community has appropriate services when needed, and clearly there's flexibility and needs to be flexibility in both the police department and the fire department. Talk a little bit about that and what we're trying to do to address those costs moving forward.
Certainly. Normally, you have a situation in most of our, especially in our union departments, where overtime is a function of your staff availability. Sometimes it happens that overtime is also impacted by a natural disaster. In the case of our police department, if we have major crimes that require a lot of overtime, those things will boost the time regardless of the amount of staff that we have on duty. When we budget for overtime, though, we don't budget for worst-case scenarios. We hope that if we have vacancies, we know we'll have overtime to cover vacancies, and those two accounts come together, and we've got a good budget to cover both overtime and regular time. When we have major issues happening, we know that we will have both all of our regular salary dollars spent and our overtime dollars spent. The city manager keeps a contingency in the general fund. It's very modest at $200,000, which is 0.2% of the general fund budget for emergency situations. But with overtime, I think there are other issues that I haven't mentioned that can also impact us, and that is in the situation of injuries and the vacancies happening and our desire to keep service levels where they're at. So our fire department had a bad 16 to 24 months of injuries, and we need to keep a minimum staffing on all of the rigs, so we have a lot more overtime. We're coming out of that situation, so we hope that our overtime will be going down into 2018, but it's something we have to fund this year because the services are rendered and expected by Evanston residents, and the same can be said for the police department. We have a lot of special duties that officers are expected to be at beyond just the normal beat. And residents depend on those additional services, those that outreach presence. I know that everyone in this room has been to a ward meeting or any event where one of the police officers is there, and they're not there because they were on their beat. They're there as a specific service to the alderman to talk about crime in the area, to talk about a variety of programs in place. All of those things add up to potentially additional costs. We're fortunate this past year to not be talking too much about any overtime on the public works and water and sewer sides. Those things have all operated within budget parameters.
So kind of just to wrap up this first segment then, it seems, from what you've said and sort of the work that we've done, that there's a structural issue with the building permit revenue, that we're seeing the end of a major stint of construction, certainly led by Northwestern University, but certainly in other parts of the community too. And I guess, Marty, I'm looking to see if you agree that, once we address that issue, that we bring that building permit number down to a number that we feel comfortable with moving forward. And over time, we've shifted some of that money so it's not funding ongoing resources. So I think it's important people understand that we have made adjustments, and the city council has been very good about insisting on this. That some of that money has been for ongoing expenses, some of it's been for one time, but clearly we're coming to the end of a cycle. And so once we address that, we probably have the ability to address some of these other factors within the framework of that budget once we've addressed that change in permit. Is that a fair assessment?
Certainly, and it is a fair assessment both conceptually and based on our own history. When we go back to the Great Recession, prior to the Great Recession was the Great Bubble. And we had building permits through the roof, literally, and a lot of dollars we would keep some of it in the general fund for operating, but a lot of it would go to economic development purposes or capital purposes. So they were one-time revenues for one-time expenses. But even with that definition that's it's not a hard and fast rule. You have to analyze it each year. Even with that delineation, when we hit the Great Recession, we had, from our high of 880 staff members, we went down to 790. So more than a 10% reduction in operating staff citywide. And we're still well below that upper 880 level for full-time equivalents. The same thing's happening to a much lesser, and I want to stress that, a much lesser degree right now, where we think we're coming to the end of a building cycle. The revenues for building permits will decrease. We will eliminate any transfers that would be going to capital or to any one-time expenditures, but that may not be enough to also still cover all of our operating expenses. So as we look at 2018, we will, as the city manager pointed out, address what is our baseline for revenues, and then adjust our baseline operating to that, and then look to see what one-time revenues we can use to cushion the blow if we have to do any service reductions, or to take and look at just going to one-time solutions and wait out 1 year. We do that as a prudent move because we do not want to take a lot of services away based on 1 year's worth of revenue fluctuations. And that is also why, as you pointed out, we have a fund balance policy. So our fund balance policy of having 2 months of reserves in the general fund is meant to allow us the chance in a dire situation to run a budget deficit and still provide services and fix our revenues and expenses in the next year. We don't think we're in that dire of a situation for the end of 2017. We would like to end the 2017 year balanced, and that's going to take some expense reductions because of the permitting situation. But our goal is not to access any fund reserves for this year, and also to present a balanced budget for next year. Again, not accessing the reserves because we're right now, and as we'll point out later, we're below our 2-month minimum, not by a lot, but below by a few percent, and we would like to get back up to that minimum.
So I think that's kind of a good start. We're half an hour into our 2-hour scheduled event here this evening, and we're here talking at the Morton Civic Center about the 2018 proposed budget for the city of Evanston. We have a good crowd gathered here at the Civic Center. We're getting questions from the crowd here, where we've got at least one question off of Facebook, but we're also available to get your calls on 311 if you'd like to call and get some information, some questions to us. If you'd like to tweet us, send us messages through Facebook, all that is available. So we would encourage folks to do that as we move forward. And I think we'll move now into the next segment here as we talk department by department about the various municipal operations, some of their challenges and achievements over the last year. So let's maybe first, Marty, talk a little bit about the City Council's goals. This is the goals that were set by the 79th City Council, which ended their term this spring. But certainly issues of important city facilities, city streets. We'll talk a little bit more about the city's capital program probably later on this evening. Economic development has come up from time to time. We're getting some questions about economic development, and I think we'll wait. Johanna Leonard, our community development director, has been in that role for a short period of time, but for many years was our economic development manager. So I think, Marty, we'll let, when Johanna comes up here, maybe we can talk a little bit more. We're getting some historical questions on economic development, and I think she can be helpful to answer those questions. But, you know, the importance of economic development, maybe we can just take a minute right now, since that's a council goal, has been a council goal in the 8 years I've been city manager. The importance of investment in our communities, the importance of the work we've done citywide. Really, it goes back to the TIFs that were created, the downtown 2 TIF that was retired. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's a TIF really for the record books here in the state of Illinois as the assessed valuation of the property change. I don't want to put you on the spot. No, I know you know those numbers pretty well off the top of your head.
So I'll do that in reverse order and make sure we hit the TIF discussion and then talk a little bit about the importance overall on economic development. The downtown 2 TIF, and I've only been with the city for 9 years, but I've known Evanston since about the mid-1990s. A name you would know is Bill Stafford, the finance director. Mr. Stafford and I knew each other, and I came here and I saw the downtown when it was parking lots. in the early 90s. And then I got to come back in 2001 for another purpose and saw all of the redevelopment that had happened. And for those that are concerned about some of the debt we have coming up regarding Crown or regarding a few things, I will tell you that the council and city of the 1990s took some incredible economic development investments. Some would call them risks, but they were investments, and they've paid off tremendously. And it's not a matter of opinion. When you have a situation like our downtown 2 TIF, which think of the theater and the original was Wolfgang Puck's. I'll date myself, but that block and a few of the other blocks, that area was worth $2 million on the tax rolls. And when the downtown 2 TIF closed, it was worth $150 million on the tax rolls. There was a lot of investment on that, and a lot of people that understand TIF would realize that the investment that came out of that downtown 2 TIF, the last year of the TIF, it paid $9.5 million in tax increment. But all of those taxes were from the new development going from $2 million to $150 million. It wasn't from somebody down on Brummel or somebody out on Central paying an additional amount. It was from the property taxes in that TIF district that created this. So all those new building owners and new property owners basically paid for their own, a lot of their infrastructure through their own property taxes. We were the vehicle through financing, but it was still paid for. Some people worry about the interest. Well, they paid the interest on all of that debt as well. When you don't have a tax levy associated with any of that TIF's debt, no Evanston resident had a higher property tax bill because of $148 million worth of investment. Generally speaking, when we go to all of the economic development, if we didn't have the Washington National and the downtown TIF, and then some of our special TIFs that helped with Target and helped with Home Depot, we would not have the economic engine that we have. And when we look at our general fund a little bit later, when you see that there's $10 million in operating revenue from property taxes on a $118 million general fund. There's more than that. We almost had more than that in building permits one year. There's 50% more than that in sales tax. And unless we have development that promotes businesses in town, then we have to change that distribution of property taxes. And that's just the CFO's opinion. That doesn't go to culture. We want a community that has all of these nice places to go to and have a good experience with. And so economic development and community development combined are incredibly important for us. We have not faced what I would call drastic upturns or downturns because our developed, what we would call our, I'm forgetting my star term. What's our term for built infrastructure? No.
The built environment.
Our built environment is so stable, meaning that it is diversified, that we're able to withstand a downturn in auto sales or big box sales that are off because we have a lot of restaurants, we have a lot of unique stores, and our sales taxes haven't boomed and they haven't busted. And that helps us provide ongoing services year over year, and is why economic development is so important on a global scale.
And we'll talk more, especially about the activity over the last several years, the tremendous success of the Howard Ridge and Howard Chartree TIF, the TIF that was put in place to help the Dempster Dodge, the Evanston Plaza Shopping Center. So we're getting some questions about that, and clearly, in the interest of time, economic development, a key economic engine that's really going to serve this community well over time.
I do want to, the next one, I do want to hit the one thing for I talked a little bit about debt, but I was just looking at our financial reports going back 10 years, and in 2006, 2007, the city had $292 million in debt. And back then, we didn't have to count the pension debt. And since then, this year, we have $192 million in debt, but we have to count the pension debt. Changes in financial standards make that required. So our debt is a little bit higher than it was 10 years ago, but our bonded debt has decreased by $100 million for infrastructure. So those things that we can manage, we have been managing. It's been very difficult to manage the pension debt when we don't get to determine what the interest rate is in the world at large. And then according to state of Illinois labor laws, it's difficult for us to say, well, we're not going to give a raise this year or the next year when an arbitrator can decide what our raise might be. And from being a good employer, nor would we want to go down that path. But we are a little bit constrained in the pension environment. And so those things that the city's been able to manage, that's why it's a big thing on the council goals. We have managed those.
Services for at-risk families, so certainly we've been doing a lot of work there. Vonda Thomas-Smith, our Director of Health and Human Services, is here. I think we'll wait till her segment to kind of go through all the successes that we've had there. Water and sewer, we've talked about. Violent crime reduction, again, a tremendous achievement through the Evanston Police Department. Crime has been reduced consistently the last 4 years, so I think we've been able to succeed in that goal as well. So why don't we move on to the departments? The first department to talk about is the city manager's office. I think it's important to talk about there's 10 business units, and Marty, there aren't very many city manager offices around that would have 10 business units, have 10 separate functions in them. Usually managers' offices are pretty lean, a manager, an assistant manager, maybe an assistant to the city manager, but that's not how we do it in Evanston.
The city manager's office, along with administrative services, has changed a lot in the last 8 years, and that's because we continue, and we're going to do it again this coming year, reevaluate our administration. This city manager's office includes what the city manager just explained, but it also has a finance division in it, which is 20 employees.
So it's citywide finance, so it's
Yes,
all the finance.
For our $300 million budget. It also has economic development included in it. It also has our arts, our sustainability, a variety that, as it says here, the total full-time equivalent count is 32. Normally it'd be 5, maybe 6 for a community of this size. And I want to make sure everyone understands that when you look at the revenues, well, all of our citywide revenues come into the finance division. That's where we count them all up in the general fund. So no, the city manager's office isn't bringing in $74 million through its own activities. That's where the building permit revenue, that's not where that's where property taxes are and sales tax. All of our general taxes are all included in this. And by the same token, the city manager's office, even with 32 employees, is not spending $9.9 million. That's also where we have some of our fund-wide transfers. So in there is in the expense budget is a $1.7 million transfer of building permit revenue to the capital fund. Now, we're not going to do that because the building permit revenues aren't coming in, but that's why the budget is as high as it was. So take 1.7 million out right away. And we have also another transfer for debt service and a few others that are in the city manager's office, but are not representative of salaries being paid to employees, expenses going out the door to contractors. And to understand the given budget, you do need to look at the detail a little bit to realize that in this case, the city manager's office is not as large as it would look. But I think what's really important is that what we're saying to the community is the city manager wants to keep an eye on all of these revenues directly and all of these expenses, and so they are consolidated in this area and not in some far-flung portion of the budget that a resident might find hard to find.
So in addition, as you said, there's finance, which reports to economic development, and we'll talk about economic development when Johanna joins us in a minute. There's community engagement, so our social media, all of our e-newsletters, our graphic design work, our public information work, all of that is housed in the manager's office. We have a local government management fellow through the International City County Management Association. That position is there. Our cultural arts coordinator, our sustainable programs coordinator, and our equity and empowerment coordinator. Equity and empowerment is new this year, was approved, was the one position added in the city budget last year. Dr. Pat Effiam joined us earlier this year. And I get important to talk about equity and empowerment is that we're going to be applying what's known as an equity lens to the preparation of the 2018 budget. And Dr. Effiam has come up with sort of a worksheet for us to use. And so when we present the budget to the City Council in October, there will be a section that is devoted to how we reviewed all of the changes in the budget, the service reductions under that equity lens. So there are a variety of different things. The slide talks a little bit about initiatives for the year. We've been doing a lot with the business and arts community, a lot of new public art that has been sprouting up under the great leadership of Jennifer Lassick. Sunshine Enterprises is a program we've been working on with economic development. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And then we've installed a video production studio. So part of community engagement is our local government and government access operations. And so we now have a studio here in the Civic Center. We moved it from the Service Center here to the Civic Center to make it more easy for city use as well as community use. We operate under contract the video operations for District 65. Producing this program this evening at the City Council meetings, our various public meetings, so that has been a boon for us. And we try to do as much as we can to take the video and also share it on social media, and certainly we'll do that with segments of this tonight. I think, Marty, there's one question I see from a member of the public that covers the city manager's office, and that is under finance. How as much is the state reducing our income and increasing fees? And I think you talked a little bit about it earlier, but maybe you could just touch on it quickly again.
Again, it was for income tax. Our 2017 budget had $7.8 million in it, and so we are projecting a $780,000 decrease on an annual basis. So the state's year is offset by 6 months for us. So we will take that decrease over the next year and a half. We feel that if the state passes a budget for 18-19, that we will not get the 10% back. It just is not in the cards overall, given the state's current long-term fiscal picture. And then it was a 2%, Alex, on the 15, so 2% surcharge for just administration, but it's on $15 million worth of of sales tax. So that was, it was sales, right? And so that's $300,000 as just a charge to administer what they've been administering for us for the last 10 years at least. And those that have been in the field for a while would know that many communities used to collect their own home rule tax, but the state took over a lot of that around the turn of the century, including utility taxes and other collections. And that was at the behest of businesses that didn't want to complete a million different forms for a million different communities. And so that consolidation was a good idea. However, we are paying for it at a fairly substantial price now at $300,000.
I think in the interest of time, I think that takes care of the city manager's office. Let's bring up Johanna Leonard, our community development director. Let me remind you all that you're here this evening watching and participating in a budget workshop on the city of Evanston's proposed fiscal year 2018 budget. We encourage you to participate. Those of you here in the audience, we look forward to your questions. We're going to deal with some of them here in this next segment. But if you're at home, you can call 311 and submit some questions. You can submit them on Facebook. We have one question so far from Facebook. Through our Twitter feeds. We welcome your questions, and I'd like to welcome Johanna Leonard, our Community Development Director. Johanna, good evening.
Good evening.
So Johanna, you're new to this role. It's been how long?
About 3 months.
3 months. And before that, you were the Economic Development Manager for how long?
About 4 years.
4 years. So we've gotten some questions about economic development. Again, right now, the new manager, Paul Zamazak, reports to Marty. Maybe Marty, between you and Johanna, the current role of economic development, we've got 3 staff members, a manager, a economic development specialist, and an economic development coordinator. Those specialists and coordinators do a lot of work on boots on the ground, working with our geographic business districts, with our affinity business organizations, really just to kind of create opportunities for those businesses. They manage our facade improvement funds. They also work on other larger projects. So anything you want to talk about, the work that's happened in those geographic areas. I know we've done a lot of work on Howard Street over the last few years. The West Side has seen a couple different groups. The Main Dumpster Mile, you presided over the city's piece of the coming together of that special services area.
Well, when I arrived here about 7.5 years ago, some of the work that had focused primarily on downtown Evanston was focused on just that area and not on the individual neighborhood business districts. And what we heard when myself and other staff went out and visited and did those retention visits was that those businesses really wanted city attention. They had particular needs. They needed something as simple as a pothole being fixed or a sidewalk paver being replaced to just feeling as though the city heard them on their different concerns. So that's where we started to bring forward the storefront modernization and the Great Merchant Grant, which is a small pot of money that is funded to the business districts to make small projects like brochures and do special activities to bring in new customers. So those were some of the things that we heard at that time that are still important to this day.
And I do want to chime in on that one, because we've had some perceptions that our Great Merchant Grants and our Business District Grants are handouts. And I would say nothing is further from the truth in that our goal is to make sure that our economic development engine is working throughout the community. And if we did that in-house, then you have the city's pension, the city's additional costs, and what we've done, and sometimes we don't have the understanding of what a given business district wants each year. So we might develop a great program that we think is the best and isn't nimble enough compared to what the business district themselves would like to do. So by doing these grants, we've cut out the middleman, taken the hotel tax dollars and given them directly to a business association for them to then employ other local businesses to keep up their areas or do their own marketing without any overhead. And that, I think, has been a great addition to our economic development arsenal to help move things forward quickly and react quickly.
So, Johanna, we've gotten some questions this evening about some of the bigger projects that we have done over the last several years. The support of Autobarn to purchase the former Shear Brothers building in South Evanston, some of the retail commercial uses on Howard Street that have been funded through the Howard Ridge TIF. Can you talk a little bit about some of those very big projects? I mean, there's been talk in the community, where does this fit? Is this appropriate? Is this not appropriate? Talk a little bit about the history, talk a little bit about the return, because many of these projects have been up and running now for several years.
Sure.
Why don't you give it your assessment?
So the Autobarn project was the conversion of Shear Brothers' former microphone factory in a building that most of us probably have never seen. It's located directly behind the Target Center on Howard Street.
It had been vacant for a while,
Been
too.
vacant for probably 10 or 15 years at least, and Shear Brothers had moved to a new location in Skokie, and it's one of our few remaining I-2 districts, which is an industrial district, so only certain uses can go in there. So we had felt very strongly that we wanted to find a user that could utilize it as an industrial district, because that is an important use in our community. So Autobarn approached us to indicate that they wanted to use that for a space to hold their large certified pre-owned car inventory, as well as some auto repair uses for their three at that point franchises. So we worked with them. The challenges with that property was that it was a microphone factory. It was not a car retail space. It was not a space that you could do the auto repair, and it needed some significant work between walls and roof and some remediation.
And you had said it's been empty for a long time.
It's been empty for a very long time.
It's conceivable that many people sort of kicked the tires of the building and thought that perhaps the costs associated with the use just didn't make sense.
And it was a very large property without necessarily street frontage that is more attractive to some users. But for Autobarn's use, they didn't need that street frontage. So we worked with them to do sort of three areas of economic development. We worked with the county, Cook County, to provide, I believe it was a Class 7B, which said we will work with you the county will approve reduction in assessment that will reduce their property taxes. Because one of the things that often happens with these very large, multi-acre projects is that the taxes become prohibitively expensive once you do the rehab. So they were concerned about that. So the county And Commissioner Suffredin's office worked with us to help pass that classification, which provides a reduction for a period of 10 years and then ramps back up to the assessment of 25%. So we did that, and then we had a TIF, the Tax Increment Financing District, that Marty mentioned earlier, and we utilized $2.5 million from there to offset their rehab costs. And I don't have the exact dollar.
Well, maybe I'll cut to the chase. So why do we do this? I mean, there are people in the community who say, blah, 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 this is investing in one private business, and that's not fair. But why do cities do redevelopment? Why is something like this Autobarn project so important to the city? And what have we seen since it's been completed?
So we do, cities like Evanston do economic development because this is business retention. Autobarn is our only remaining car dealer, and we do this to retain them and to this help them grow. It freed up some space on a Chicago Avenue corridor, which is commercial, abuts residential, that took some congestion off of an area that was largely residential and was feeling that squeeze. We did it because we grew jobs. We were able to work with them to coordinate with the high school to help some of the high school students who weren't necessarily on the college path to employ them. I believe they added at the end of the day a little bit over 40 jobs, and they're still slowly going to add more jobs as they continue to expand and settle into their space. So we do it for a number of reasons that all come to bringing larger economic community benefits, not just to the bottom line.
And I'll ask Marty, so we collect sales tax in this community. Where would you put an auto dealer in sort of the rank order of sales tax producers? Do they produce 2% of our sales tax? Do they produce 50% of our sales tax? What's an order of magnitude that you would say auto sales produces for us in sales tax?
Somewhere between, since they are just our local sales tax only, so, and that's 9.9 to $10 million, they're producing 400,000 plus in sales tax. I was almost typing to Alex, give me the exact number of Autobarn sales tax.
Well, and we obviously are, we don't give specific numbers, but I mean, but just order of magnitude.
But it is a,
So
that
Alex,
could be
what do you think? They're one of the highest.
They're one of the highest, and they could be 4 to 5%, 3 to 5% of our total taxes from one place. And I think what's also
And from a dollar amount, how much is that approximately?
300,000 to 500,000
A year.
A year. And what's really critical is it wasn't just that amount; it was also the loss of that amount. If we were not able to retain them, not only would we not have the growth that they had by adding the two smaller dealerships, we could have lost the Nissan and the Volkswagen.
Sure.
Those could have went the other direction. So you could have had a very large swing, and then the development costs along Chicago Avenue to do something different.
Sure.
So I think when we did this, the other part of what Johanna and all staff does is we do return on investment analyses on these. And in the Autobarn case, the return on investment was easy with the TIF. We could put the dollars into public infrastructure because we had no other private developments lined up for that TIF. So it was an easy calculation. We ended up we just finished Howard Street down there, the intersection. But for the Chicago Avenue, at $300,000 to $500,000 a year with a 2.5 to 2.9 million investment, you have an ROI of 5 to 6 years. And just about any developer would love to have a return on investment of that short of a time frame. Most banks will do a commercial loan based on a 10-year loan time frame, and so we were well within that.
And one last piece of economic development, then I want to be, there's some commentary in which I want to at least summarize. So the Howard Ridge TIF, we've done a lot of investing on Howard Street, Ward 8, Peckish Pig, working on a theater. In broad terms, where's that money come from? What kind of return on investment have we seen? What kind of return on investment do you think we will see moving forward?
Sure. So why do we do that? It's that how Evanston has seen multiple building booms, strong economic cycles, but Howard Street hadn't experienced those things. We were hungry to get, literally with the restaurants, to get things that bring the benefits of other parts of Evanston's business districts into the southern part of Evanston to provide that livable community of that third place of places that people can go enjoy that are not their home or their workplace. We had a number of buildings that were for sale at a very low, very deeply discounted price. So a few years ago, when we had money in our tax increment financing district, which is the whole point of creating one of those districts, is to utilize that money to do things that the local economy is not doing.
So why weren't people buying, there was a boom, why weren't people putting that money down on Howard Street, do you think?
We had, I think there's some perception issues. We had some people that we spoke to that were property owners that we said, this should be a restaurant. This would be a great restaurant, trying to encourage people to do it on the private sector. And people said, oh, nobody will ever come to Howard Street. And somebody literally said that about the building that is now Peckish Pig, which won in its first year a State of Illinois Delicious Destination Award that only a few are awarded in the state. So there's just a perception. And we also had one single landlord who owned multiple properties, who was kind of holding the whole thing landlocked and was extracting the greatest amount of rent from tenants when they weren't necessarily even tenants that were conducting businesses that were the highest and best use for those spaces.
There's a couple other questions on economic development. Let me, Alex, are they up way at the top of the page? Talking about the development that the council recently approved on Chicago Avenue at Howard Street. Again, this was a mix of funding, asking why did that occur, and I think you've answered a lot of those questions. And ultimately, these are issues that come before the city council, and the city council makes those determinations using a lot of the very factors that you have made a comment to.
And I would say that when the question that said, why was there a $3 million investment? It was a $2 million investment. The affordable housing was changed and not included in the final analysis. So it's moving forward, and from that, we did a 10-year analysis again. I will say, why do we do it? Because we did a return on investment analysis and showed that with the support of the TIF district and in a but-for analysis, meaning if we didn't have the TIF, we have proof that corner where the Chicago development is for the last how many decades did nothing. And with this potential, we will have a great mixed development that accomplishes affordable housing, provides new units, and provides some retail in an area that went undeveloped for decades.
And then finally, there were just a couple of questions, just I think expressing angst. Why has the city spent so much money? Who's accountable? Why is this happening? Why is there not more information? And certainly we can't all, as staff, answer those questions. We prepare this and the city council has its policy deliberations. But can you talk a little bit about the reporting that we do?
Sure.
We report monthly, we report quarterly, and how can members of the public get access to the reporting that we do on the projects, on the various loans, and how they're all coming?
So there's the weekly city manager report that is sent out from your office, and the Economic Development Division provides a report monthly. I believe it's still the first week of the month. A component of that reports the status of all the loans or money that's been spent. So most of the economic development deals that we've done have really been loans that are expected to be paid back. So the example that I referenced earlier, Peckish Pig, the investment that we've made in that property is about $675,000, and then we shifted all the responsibility onto that particular entity. They pay the taxes, they maintain the building. So our costs, we maintain the asset. We have the asset on our books, but we're not spending money on the maintenance. They are. And then the benefit we get on that is the sales tax and the liquor tax. We don't necessarily report the individual liquor tax for each business, but the progress in the payments and that they're in good standing is reported in that report, as well as any other loan.
And if people wish to get this document that Johanna is talking about, you can go to our city website, cityofevanston.org, and I believe, Martha, it's under e-newsletter. Is it / e-newsletter or / newsletter? Or / to sign up for the e-news. So it's at cityofevanston.org / newsletter, and you can go on there, you put in your email address, and there are 20 plus, 30 plus different e-newsletters that you can sign up for. And one of them is the city manager's weekly report. Nearly every community I know does something like this. We're the only community I know that residents can actually sign up and have it emailed to you. So these type of information that Johanna was talking about is available in that report. We would encourage people to go to our website and sign up for that. So I think that takes care of the the economic development questions, why don't we move on? We're at 8:05. We're committed to be out of here in 55 minutes, and we're on department number 2. Talk a little bit about what your department does. We also have the managing the livability process, and I think perhaps we might refer people to last year's discussions about that, because I think we want to focus a little bit more this evening on community development.
Well, the Community Development Department is responsible for the planning and zoning activities, so our enforcement and oversight of our zoning code and long-term neighborhood and community planning activities as it relates to land use and transportation. And then we also have the building code and inspection services, including the building permit information that Marty referenced earlier. So we're responsible for inspections, code enforcement, for building code. Right-of-way permits now is part of that group. And then we also include housing and grants. We get a amount of money from the federal government, from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and it includes CDBG block grant. It depends on what Congress does, but we get about between $1.6 and $1.8 million per year on that, and a few other grants, smaller grants. And then we also have transportation mobility services, which includes some of the projects like Divvy, are working with transportation planning for all, and thinking about how people get around in our community, and our relationships with Metra and CTA and PACE.
So we've talked a lot about building permits. Your department's responsible for that, responsible for tracking and estimating. So what can we do to make sure we're in a better place moving forward, estimating those building permits?
Well, I think there's a few things. One is thinking about the longer term, some of these longer term projects that we've relied on Northwestern, or some of the planned developments that produce larger dollars. Those we know are coming to an end. We've done a bit more tracking on a month-to-month basis and looking at trends over the previous years. We know construction comes in different waves, so instead of just looking at the previous years, we're looking at the past 10 years and where we've come with building permits, and tried to estimate a little more conservatively for this coming year.
We've got some questions for your department. One deals with affordable housing. They would like to outline how the city and the city council stated commitment to addressing affordable housing in the 2018 budget, including but not limiting to a specific plan for the spending of the affordable housing fund. So I know the city council has asked that same question of you. What do you say?
That sounds like a plug for next Monday night city
Is it?
council.
Well, why don't you talk a little bit about that then?
So next, we'll give a sneak preview. Next Monday night, myself and several of my colleagues will be talking about what we currently do in regards to affordable housing. So we have a fund that has become more well-known as planned developments have come through and paid for into what's called the Affordable Housing Fund, instead of providing on-site units. We have an ordinance that says, set in sort of brief terms, you either provide on-site or you pay a certain fee to not provide on-site. So to date, we've had 2 developments that have been subject, that have been approved, and they have paid into the site, into it, and one development is providing on-site. So we're going to talk a little bit about how some of our ideas about how to utilize some of those funds, and they're not necessarily building or purchasing new units, but ways to enhance some of the existing building stock that we already have, and our partners in landlords and other service providers, and how we can leverage those dollars to get people housed.
So the sneak preview is, we're going to talk about how we can continue to invest in building units. We're going to talk about how we can take those dollars and support people who need the help now. Because I think some of the concern we've heard from members of the council, members of the community, is that there's a need today. What can we do with that? And then I think the third one, and maybe you didn't touch on this, was policies. What housing policies, what zoning policies can we have to give people some greater flexibility and have the council consider? So it's really three areas, and ultimately the council's decision, but this is all going to be teed up at the council meeting next Monday night. Talking another question, this one's from Facebook. After downtown construction is finished, there's a concern that perhaps there should be a ban on downtown construction for a few years. I think Marty talked a little bit about you know, some of the transitions the downtown has been through, and clearly we're in the midst of one right now. I think we're not in the position really to talk about a ban moving forward. But the other part of the question was this conflict between walkers, cyclists, and drivers. And there's another question also from Facebook regarding the safety of bike lanes. So you mentioned that you have a transportation and mobility function within community development. What is that? What programs are we doing to try to address this sort of conflict we see more and more between people in cars, people walking, people on bikes?
Sure. So the council adopted, I believe in July, a Complete and Green Streets program, which makes plans for when we develop and rehabilitate streets to make sure that we're planning for all users in mind. Sometimes when we've put bike lanes in or have pedestrian access points, it's a stopgap from what's already there. So this really thinks about a holistic approach to dealing with transportation for all users. One of the things our transportation and mobility coordinator also does is an education and outreach piece. She's working with Northwestern to make sure that new students who may have never ridden a bike in a more urban area are prepared and to have those things. So we're trying to connect those students with resources to purchase bike helmets and bike locks and other things that enhance safety. We've been working on a protected bike lane that will be here very soon, hopefully, and other things that enhance the bike safety.
Great. Well, Johanna, thank you for joining us tonight. I think we'll have you back. We'll do a separate program, I think, about all the excellent work we're doing with livability and sustainability. We've really done a lot internally, but I think given the interest of time, we're going to move on. So thank you for joining us. We're going to invite Erica Storley, the Deputy City Manager and the Director of the Administrative Services Department, up next. Let me remind you that you're watching a budget workshop for the 2018 City of Evanston budget. If you'd like to participate, please come on down to the Morton Civic Center. We're here in G300, or call us at 311, send us an email to 311@cityofevanston.org, tweet us, interact with us on Facebook. We'd love to hear from you. We've been hearing especially from Facebook folks this evening, so thank you for those of you watching and communicating with us on Facebook. We really appreciate that. Erica Storley, Deputy City Manager, good evening.
Hello.
You're the Administrative Services Director as well. How long have you been in that capacity?
It's been a couple of years now.
And you did other things, I think, with the city before that?
Long history of working for the city dating back to 2004.
Well, great. Well, thank you for being here tonight. So Administrative Services, you know, that's kind of a generic title for a variety of things. Why don't you talk a little bit about the different component parts that make up Administrative Services?
Administrative services serves to help the internal services function better, but also we have a couple of other operations in the department that are external facing, but the majority of the services are internal facing. We have fleet services, maintaining the core fleet of vehicles that work for all the departments, facilities management. We have 20 staff people maintaining 45 buildings throughout the city. We have information technology, human resources, and then we have parking, and we also have crossing guards. So it's a little bit of a mishmash, but I like to call it the most exciting department in the city.
So you got me there on that most exciting part of the city part.
She's throwing down.
As the police chief and fire chief and the public works director and the parks and rec director are there, I think you've set a challenge now for the rest of the evening.
It's a healthy competition.
That's right. Baby Wally, go to bed. Don't wait for me. A lot of, I mean, certainly there are focuses of the Administrative Services Department that are more internal, as you said, internal facing. So I think our IT operation, we could crow about that. We switched over to Gmail this year. We're saving some money there. We completely reworked our internal city network and all of the core components of that to save money and for efficiency purposes. We have our fleet operation, which we're very proud of. But I think the one piece of things, and certainly facility maintenance, human resources, all things that are great, but the one thing people are probably talking about more is parking. And the discussions we've been having about potentially raising revenue with changing ticket costs, changing boots. We have this thing named after, what is it, a barnacle, a barracuda, something like that we're talking about. So why don't you talk a little bit about where we're at with parking fines, innovations in parking, changes in systems, and how that may come into play with the 2018 budget.
Oh, sure. So there's been a lot of changes in the parking industry over the past decade, and we anticipate seeing many more with self-driving cars arriving in the future. What does that mean for parking in the city of Evanston? Well, parking in the city of Evanston continues to be limited and complex. We have recently hired a new parking division manager who's focusing primarily on, what these changes might bring for the city and how we can go about making parking easier in Evanston, not just in the downtown, but throughout all of the areas that people park in. We've been looking at different technologies for making it easier to park in Evanston. We want to come up with an app in the next year or two that will show parking availability. I think that our new citation management processing vendor, which is a vendor that will help us issue parking citations, will be going online with them in February. The most exciting part about that is that you will have an app that you can both pay for your parking with, pay any citations that you might get, purchase your residential parking permits through the app, and be reminded about other wheel tax payments and things like that. So all through one app, be able to pay for all of those things and find parking. So that's one other thing that's coming down the pipe in 2018.
We've got the amnesty program. How's that going?
Yes, the amnesty program continues through September 30th. We're hopeful that all residents will take advantage of that. If you have any outstanding parking tickets, all of your fees and fines are waived until the end of the month. So if you haven't had a chance to make whole on your parking outstanding tickets, now is the time to do it. So please try to take advantage of that. You can pay your tickets online, call 311, go to the Civic Center. Any of those options will take care of those for you.
As you know, I've been talking with employees about their ideas for the budget, and one thing I've heard loud and clear is we should go after those folks that owe us money. So talk a little bit about how we're going to be able to do that, especially on the parking violations moving forward.
Sure. So there's a lot of things we talked about on how we can increase our collection on the parking tickets. As you may have heard, parking tickets account for about $2.8 million of our revenues in the general fund. So that does help support all of the operating activities of the city. So those are your ticket dollars are at work, helping make sure that the city runs smoothly. One of the things that we're looking at is this device that Wally mentioned earlier, which is called the Barnacle. It's a booting device that goes on a windshield that precludes somebody from trying to drive the vehicle instead of actually putting the boot on the tire, which costs more money and involves a lot more resources and time. So this will be a quicker way to boot vehicles and help try to get those outstanding tickets paid. Also, we're looking at things like credit reporting for those outstanding tickets for individuals who have outstanding payments that haven't yet been paid. We also have a program where once you reach 10 tickets, you do get a driver's license suspension. Hopefully there's not many people who are in that situation, but we do have several hundred, unfortunately.
We've got a couple questions. Some of them deal with your responsibilities. We have a question from Facebook. Will city employees receive cost of living increases for 2017? And I think I'll talk a little bit with Marty as well on this. That's an outstanding issue because I think we've got the 3 labor agreements, which we're still working on. Those employees that are not represented by labor agreements, we always wait and see what happens there. I think you mentioned earlier you were optimistic that we would have agreements with the labor unions, and I think those agreements would have some adjustment in salaries.
And I think, City Manager, you've summed it up. It's not, I don't believe it's an if, I think it's a when, and we just don't know that it will happen in 2017. If any of the bargaining units decides is as their right, if police or fire, for instance, decides that we can't get to an agreement and go to what's called binding arbitration, then we don't set the schedule anymore. And we have had a past practice that we wait until the contracts for labor agreements are settled before moving forward with non-bargained positions. So in the event that we end up with arbitration, that could delay things. But I think we will be, the key is also common sense and flexibility. If we have one unit that goes to arbitration and is arbitrated for 2 years, I know that some of you would wonder about that statement, but a neighboring community had one of their bargaining units, I believe it was 3 or 4 years that they went without an
Well,
increase.
Let's name names.
Oh, I'm not naming a name.
I'll name it. Was the Village of Skokie Fire Department. And I think it was close to 4 years.
4 years.
That
And
they were in arbitration.
so I don't believe that one of the things that the city has done an excellent job is balancing labor and, staff satisfaction with being a part of this community with our total costs. So it won't do us any good from a productivity standpoint to wait 4 years for one group that is not even responsible necessarily for another deciding to arbitrate. However, we haven't been in that situation for more than a decade. So our policy of common sense that we wish to wait until we settle our union contracts, until we do non-bargaining, has been a good one, and I think we'll continue with that.
Another question from Facebook. Under what circumstances will there be staff layoffs? And I think unfortunately, those circumstances are here, that we will have staff layoffs. My hope is that those numbers are as small as possible, but given the budget deficits we're looking at, we do not have the ability to make up that difference with the city council's direction of not raising taxes and fees without layoffs. So we're working diligently to make sure those numbers are as small as possible, and we really won't have a final number till right before we issue the budget on October 6th.
Can I hit the finance one? Because I just want a clarification that one about Rosie.
Yeah, so we have a question about that we're painting a rosy picture of the budget, despite news reports to the contrary. And if things are such in great shape, why is the city selling its property? Well, it's not rosy. I think what we're trying to say is it's not impossible, that there are paths to making this make sense. We have a budget of almost $300 million. It's not that we're poor. The issue is how do we address the needs of the community in a responsible way. When you look at the library parking lot, which is what's being referenced in the question, that is being considered by the council for sale, not because we need the money from the sale of the property, it's because of what it will do to continue to be another economic engine for the downtown. Office workers are really important. We're building condominiums and apartments. We already have offices. We already have the university in the downtown, but we need more office workers. Our office buildings are largely filled. By having another office building, that's going to be people who are shopping, who are dining here in the downtown, providing economic activity. That property will come off, will go up back on the tax rolls. There's ongoing, regular, annual tax payments will be made. So we're not selling the property. The council's not considering selling the property just to get a quick hit of $4 million. It's because of what it will do to contribute. As we've talked about all of economic development this evening, the importance of the TIFs, the success on Howard Street, the success we've had in West Evanston. It's about building an engine. So that's where the rosy picture comes from. The rosy picture is that the overall engine of the city of Evanston is in pretty good shape, but we need to continue to be vigilant on that. So I think that takes care of those questions. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. Next is Grant Farrar, the Corporation Counsel, and I'll remind you we're here talking about the Evanston fiscal year 2018 budget. We encourage there's still time to come on down and join us here. You can call, you can Facebook, and we appreciate again, we're getting probably more feedback from Facebook tonight than any time we've done an event like this. So we really appreciate those of you who are watching and using Facebook as an opportunity to reach out to us. But we're on Twitter this evening. 311 operators are standing by, so you can call us, email us as well. I'm joined by Grant Farrar, the city's Corporation Counsel. Welcome, Grant.
Good evening.
Corporation Counsel. Hard to know what that means. So what does the Corporation Counsel do?
Well, we, as members of the law department, represent the city in all facets of litigation, administrative adjudication, work over in the Skokie Courthouse, and also advise and counsel the city council and staff with respect to ordinances and legal matters affecting just about every department in the city of Evanston.
So if I have a legal problem with a landlord, I can't come to you and have you deal with that, or if my neighbor is playing music too loud, you're not going to go to court and represent me.
Correct. We only can represent the city by charter and statute.
Okay. So up on the screen, we have the number of positions you have. So in addition to being responsible for the civil and criminal matters of the city, you're also responsible for the liquor licenses.
Correct.
And have staff the liquor board. As you look at the year, what do we need to know from a budget perspective? I think there's been issues in the papers about some court cases. We win some, we win more than we lose, certainly, but unfortunately, from time to time, we're paying off things. How does that have an impact on the budget? How do we budget for that? And what's the future look like as far as those kind of costs associated with the law department?
It's an excellent question. What's important and interesting to note is when we really assumed and took over the litigation portfolio for the city of Evanston, we were at approximately 30 cases a year.
And this
now,
was about 8 years ago?
This was in 2010, effectively.
2010, okay.
I've been here almost 8 years. So as we have gone through those cases and we've done budget memorandums and distributed that information widely, the city's success ratio has been 7 to 1. I'll say that again, 7 to 1. What that means is winning on summary judgment, motions to dismiss, having a plaintiff voluntarily to dismiss a case, or winning all the way up to trial. We have won 7 times more than we've lost, and that's an important.
Now, if the Cubs were doing that, I'd be buying World Series tickets.
Well, it's a nice number. You of course always want to win everything, but that's completely unrealistic in today's world. It is indeed true that one of the cases that we've litigated for a number of years went to trial. We were unsuccessful. We appealed it, and we were unsuccessful on the appeal. However, we won that part of the case in arbitration, so effectively it was a wash. So it is a very challenging environment. We litigate against very skilled attorneys on the plaintiff side, and when the city council makes a very considered judgment on whether or not to settle a case, they give that direction, and we follow that direction.
And Marty, I'm looking at revenues. Are those judgments that the law department's winning, or are those other revenues?
Those are other revenues, and I'd have to go see.
That's probably the liquor.
It's probably the
liquor.
liquor license.
No, liquor is totally separate from, it is, I was thinking of liquor taxes. Sorry, that's the liquor licenses. But I would want to add.
So we should pause and just say that in order to sell liquor in the city of Evanston, we collect licenses in excess of $500,000. So liquor is big business in the city of Evanston. Francis Willard, rest your soul.
That's right. But one of the things we haven't mentioned is the law department, we just followed or had community development and economic development up, and we were speaking of it. The law department is key in the creation of a lot of our documents. When we're dealing with developers and we're dealing with large retailers, some of them are national in base, we need good representation as we develop our parts of the agreements to make sure we're accurately representing the citizens of Evanston. And the law department's responsible for helping the economic development staff as well as a variety of departments in making sure our agreements are up to snuff. Otherwise, we can end up with an agreement 6, 7 years down the road for which nobody has ownership for, and there's a problem with. And we haven't seen that. We have great agreements these days, and it takes a lot of attention to detail. And in many communities, that's farmed out. And then you don't have the same commitment when it's an outside law firm that's looking at something on a case-by-case basis and may not understand the city's entire picture.
I don't see any questions for you from the public, Grant, so I'll say thank you for coming in tonight. Thank you for the work that you do representing the City of Evanston Corporation.
Thank you.
Next up is our Health and Human Services Director, Avonda Thomas-Smith. Again, as she's coming up, I'll remind you, we're here talking about the 2018 City of Evanston budget. We encourage you, again, thank you for those folks commenting on Facebook tonight. We appreciate all those comments we're getting. We're on Twitter. You can call us. You can send emails to us. We're happy to get those questions. And I'm joined here by Avonda Thomas-Smith, our Director of Health and Human Services. Avonda,
Good evening.
How are you tonight?
I'm great, thank you.
So the Health Department does a variety of different things. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to summarize them in broad terms, and I want to talk a little bit more about the human services side, because I think that people are really concerned about that. So on the environmental health and code enforcement side, your staff responds to complaints from folks. They deal with rats, and rats have been a very big issue, and I think your department's been very aggressive, and you've done a great job of reporting about all the work we're doing with rats, but all levels of code enforcement. You work on restaurant inspections, other private health inspections. But then there's a second part of your department that is the Human Services Division. division. And why don't you talk a little bit tonight about what that division does and the services it provides?
Sure. So the goal of the Human Services arm of the department is really to prevent any inequities in housing or access to health care. So our role is twofold. It's prevention and it's remediation. And so the remediation area of the division is really to create stability for families who have found themselves in crisis, have found themselves in a shortfall. So our general assistance program is an entitlement program for those who are income eligible. And many of our participants are seasonal workers or workers who may work in construction fields or fields that have a short-term ability of getting financial stability. And so some of our residents come to us really from the gamut, wanting to have information about what options do they have in terms of housing, what options do they have, because residents are really concerned about staying in the community. Many of our families come to us with children that are in the district, or they may have some limited employment in the institutions that hire them. And so staff work really hard doing short-term and long-term case management to remediate the instability that may occur in some families' lives.
So let's talk about general assistance. Now,
Okay.
there was a township in Evanston. The voters of Evanston decided to abolish the township a few years back, and those services came to the city. How are those services funded, and what are they?
So those services, again, are to make sure that those who are employable get employment. And so what does that mean? We provide them some workforce development training.
Now, who's they? Is this anyone who comes in off the street, or they have to have a certain income level?
Sure.
How do we decide?
So the financial entitlement program is income driven, and what that basically means is someone can make they make at least less than $800 a month. They're eligible. So again, those who can have some short-term employment or no employment at all. Our typical participant is usually male, because many of our subsidy programs are really geared for women and children. So we have about 150 current participants. And how they benefit from the program, they get free literacy programming to make sure that their financial literacy supports them being stable. They may get some housing support, which is mortgage, tax, and rental assistance. And I'm very fortunate that this year, in January, we really assessed our participants and really learned from them the challenges that they were having staying in their homes and staying in housing in Evanston. Unfortunately, some of our participants are homeless, and some of our participants are room sharing and living in their cars. And after having a really intimate conversation with them and doing a market analysis, we determined that our shelter payments was extremely low and was really not supportive of stable housing. So in January, the City Council did vote to increase the shelter payments. The maximum currently is $600 per month, where the maximum prior was $200 per month. And what we're learning is that we're rehousing more of our participants, and our participants are staying in stable housing.
And that money comes from the General Assistance Fund?
Yes, that is correct.
And that's a separate line on the property tax?
Correct, a separate levy. And also, we're fortunate enough that since integration of the program within the city governance, we've actually been able to decrease that levy, decrease that amount, as we've done some intentional partnerships with our healthcare providers, assuring that our participants all are enrolled in healthcare and have a primary home, and they have wraparound medical services, wraparound dental services, behavioral health services, and that comprehensive wraparound services does create additional stabilities.
So the services of your department, the General Assistance Fund pays for those key services that you've just described.
That is correct.
You have grants from the state that do a lot of your health prevention programs that you've done. So really, the general fund is paying mostly just for the code enforcement.
The
and
environmental side of the
environmental,
division,
health.
yes.
I wouldn't want you to get away without talking about a really important initiative, and that's health equity.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what the department is doing there and what people will be seeing over the next year in that area?
Sure, I'm really excited about that. We're able to work with our IT department to capture some birth and death data. And what I really want to look at is the mortality, what is actually compromising the health of Evanstonians, and what is the disease burden. And we're mapping that out by ward. And so we've got some really good data that shows us where we need to target our resources in terms of reducing health inequities. And as simply said, make sure that all have access. And even those who have access, making sure they have optimal wellness. So our data is informing us differently and how we target and deploy our services. And so I'm hoping that we have some really rich information about how we've dismantled health inequities in our community and how we've improved the health of all.
Great. I don't see any questions from the public, so I'll say thank you.
Thank you.
Yolanda, for joining us this evening. Exciting stuff happening in the health department.
We are the most exciting department in the organization.
There we go. Next, the fire department, and we'll have to see what we hear about excitement from the fire department. Again, remind everyone we're here at the Morton Civic Center talking about the challenges for the 2018 budget. Fire Chief Brian Scott. Chief Scott, welcome.
Good evening.
This is the first one of these for you, isn't it?
It is.
So you were appointed fire chief how long ago?
8 months ago.
8 months ago. How's it going?
Going very well. Thank you very much.
And my understanding is you're also a new Evanston resident.
I am. Just moved in on August 21st.
Well, that's great. And you've been on the department for how many years?
17 years.
So it's finally, after 17 years, you learned enough about the community, decided to move here.
Absolutely.
Well, that's great. We have a little bit of statistics up about the fire department. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about how we provide fire service in our community.
Certainly. The department's mission is to protect life, property, and the environment. We do that 24/7. So we have 110 members. 107 of those members are sworn personnel for the department. Each day in the city of Evanston, we have 26 firefighters and paramedics on the street serving each and every day. We have 4 command staff chief officers that work within 5 particular divisions within the department, areas such as fire and EMS operations, specialized rescue, the Fire Prevention Bureau, and even emergency preparedness and management is within our purview.
So you talk about being 24/7. So you have firefighters who are scheduled on a shift schedule. So what happens if a firefighter decides he wants to go on vacation? Does that mean we have one less firefighter to serve the residents of Evanston that day? Or are there different ways that we deal with that so that there's always the same complement of firefighters?
We do. We deal with that in different ways, but generally our vacations and normal types of leave are kind of figured in, and we can accommodate those.
Okay.
I think as the Assistant City Manager alluded to earlier in the program, we've had an enormous amount of long-term injuries in the department that have impacted us, and it has affected our overtime budget.
Now, are these injuries that people are sustaining as part of a fire, or are they something that are longer term because of the service as a firefighter? Or are they happening outside of work? What kind? Is firefighting in Evanston is more unsafe than it is other places, or how does that all break down?
I wouldn't characterize firefighting in the city here more dangerous than other places, but firefighting is still a very dangerous profession. So the vast majority of these long-term injuries are actually on emergency scenes and actual structural fire incidences. So typically, though, we'll average maybe 1 or 2 long-term injuries in a given year. Unfortunately, in the last 16 to 18 months, we've been averaging much higher than that. Mm-hmm. So in the first quarter of 2017, we had 11 long-term injuries. Fortunately, we've gotten some of those people back, but right now we have 5 long-term injuries.
And Marty, you kind of referenced this earlier, kind of a more historical perspective. So is this normal, usual, or is this sort of a cyclical issue for the Evanston Fire Department? And then what have been the impacts on overtime?
It is cyclical, and it is. I have a history in insurance as well. And while you can plan, and the chief will attest, you can train, and some injuries happen, no matter how well you're trained or how well you planned. So that accounts for the cyclical nature. If you have a highly trained department and you have good plans, your baseline of injuries will be lower, but you're still going to have the unexpected. Somebody falls off a ladder through no fault of their own, and it just happened. And you would think I was being cliche, but we had someone fall off a ladder, and it was a long-term injury. But it is cyclical, and the city also then tries to fund it cyclically. We don't, if the fire department has a one bad year, we don't say, your insurance premiums just went up by $1 million, fire department. We try and average these things out over time so that if fire has a bad year, police might be having a good year, and our overall insurance costs for the city remain as level as possible.
So as we look forward to the fire department's budget for next year, on overtime, or will that level off, we think?
But I think, I think it's going to level off, but at a potentially what I would call a new normal. That you're going to have, the city, both police and fire, have had historically low budgeted overtime. And I say historically compared to other 24-hour operations that I'm aware of, that in many cases, there's just a higher level of built-in overtime. And the CFO would say that's okay because every new or every additional police or firefighter is another one that has a pension. Whereas every police or firefighter who works overtime is working overtime. It's not an additional pension that we have to worry about or in the case of an injury. So there's many variables to consider. I think fire's overtime will go up a little bit, but it is manageable based on how much outreach we want, how much we do in training, how much we pre-plan. But fire is, I think, a little bit more straightforward possibly than the sister agency. And we'll ask the chief as well, the police chief, about overtime on that subject. But I do think it will drop from the high, but I think we may need to raise the budget a little bit in coming years, just as a reflection of increase in pay and changes in operations.
So looking at the slide, it talks a little bit about revenues and expenses. There are services provided by the fire department that are recouped through the emergency medical calls, so there are ambulance billings for that. So that is probably the lion's share of that $10 million in revenue. Talks a little bit about some of the things in the strategic plan, which you're revisiting now as you become chief. And then the dive vehicle. Maybe just talk just a brief moment about all the specialized circumstances that you have to be prepared for. So
Sure.
dive and being adjacent to Lake Michigan is just one of those things.
The modern fire service really is kind of an all hazards type of mitigation service. So we really have to be prepared in a myriad of different areas. So it's not just fire and EMS anymore. We look at hazardous materials mitigation. Some of the specialized rescue that we mentioned before is talking about high angle rescue, confined space, building collapse, tunnel rescue. The dive vehicle is just one small piece of that. So firefighters literally are training hundreds of hours every year, much of it off duty, in fact, to keep up with current best practices to handle the myriad of challenges they face in the modern fire service.
We do have one question asking about most calls being ambulance emergency rather than fires, and is there ways to contain that? Because certainly if there is a medical emergency, you often will send something more than just an ambulance. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how that works.
That's an excellent question.
And any of your thoughts on how those costs can be contained.
So I think Evanston is a unique community in the fact that we will send to a typical emergency medical response an engine company or truck company along with the ambulance. And the reason we do that is really twofold. First of all, it really helps us because all of our firefighters are cross-trained as paramedics to get them quality, experienced, and trained personnel as quickly as possible. So we only have 2 frontline ambulances in the city of Evanston. So an engine or truck company may be closer, and we have the advanced life support equipment on that fire engine or truck along with trained paramedics that can get to that person when seconds count. The second piece of that is many times these people, especially in a very vertical city like the city of Evanston, we have to move people. So to have 5 trained people that can move people within apartment buildings or across long horizontal ways, it's really beneficial, again, when time and seconds count, to move them as quickly and safely as possible.
And certainly, another unique feature of Evanston is that we have 2 level 1 trauma centers.
Yes.
That there are very few communities our size anywhere in the country that would have 2 of those centers. And I would imagine that allows those emergency medical calls to conclude in a quicker fashion, because certainly you're there more quickly because of the 7.8 square miles of Evanston. But if in some cases, if you're taking a patient outside of a community, a further distance to a hospital, that takes those resources out of the area. Where in Evanston, you get to St. Francis, gets to Evanston Hospital, the patient is dropped off, and then that unit is put back into service.
It makes a huge difference in our turnaround time, absolutely. In fact, even the next closest hospital is in Skokie, so we don't need to go too far for our transports, and we're very fortunate to have these two hospitals in Evanston be level 1.
Great. Thank you, Chief Scott. Appreciate
Thank you.
your service to the community. Appreciate you being here tonight. Next up is our Director of Parks, Recreation, and Community Services, Lawrence Hemingway. Again, would remind you that we're here talking about the 2018 budget. I think an appropriate sports metaphor, Mr. Hemingway, is we may be going into overtime with tonight's workshop. I believe this is the second one of these that you've done. So you've been here, 18 months, 19 months, something like that?
That is correct, Wally, 18 months.
18 months. Well, the department, looking at the slide, 78.83 full-time equivalent positions, but that probably equates to a couple hundred individuals, wouldn't you say, when you have that 78 FTEs?
Absolutely. There are 55 full-time equivalents, and then with our part-time staff, there's an additional, a few hundred part-time folks that make up that additional FTE
So that
count.
78 number is kind of a misnomer, just the sheer number of people who are working in our community. We talked about 75 parks, the number of community centers. The revenue that you bring in is largely through fees associated with classes. What are some of the challenges that you face with a community that often expects us to provide a whole variety of services with sometimes more limited resources? What are the kind of challenges you're facing?
Well, I think one of our major challenges is just trying to balance that fine line of placing a cost on a program or an activity for a family, and with so much competition in our industry. You have private sector recreation facilities that we directly compete with, and then you also have other opportunities for families that may not be so expensive or may be free. And so for us to balance those, that fine line is what's the sweet spot in terms of cost recovery, in terms of providing the services that we do to the public.
A lot of talk about Robert Crown. What's the latest on Robert Crown? How much is it going to cost? Where are we getting the money?
Well, we're very excited about Robert Crown. As you know, the community, we have a group of volunteers who have led our efforts in fundraising. That fundraising has raised almost $10 million today. And so, and I know the city has committed another $12.5 million to this project through $10 million from my department, and then another $2.5 million from the library. And so we're really excited. The fundraising is ongoing, and our chief financial officer has a plan to get us to the end result of the project. We're really excited about the amenities that the new building will have. We'll have a dedicated preschool. We'll have a 6,000 square foot library in the facility. We'll have brand new sports and athletic fields, and we'll have 2 sheets of ice, and on and on. And so we're really excited of where the project is and the direction that it's going.
And I'll, since he was sending it my way on the cost of the project, I won't shy away. We originally, it goes back to 2013, 2014, we specified the project at approximately $30 million. Well, what I'd call the construction price index, it's an engineering index, would definitely say those costs have gone up a little bit. But also, through the community process, we had originally had a building that was going to be 110,000 square feet. And from all of the input that we received from the community and all the users, the building is now over 130,000 square feet, not all on one floor. There's a second floor. We're talking about, if you've been to any of the meetings, the gymnasium's on the second floor. It looks very, very neat, a great application. The point being is that given time, most capital projects go up. This one will be a little bit more. Robert Crown, the Friends of Robert Crown have stepped up. They anticipate going through that $10 million ceiling, And we also hope that the increased activity at the Crown Center will help to pay for long-term financing. But we'll be coming to the council this fall with a first look of anticipated costs and funding. And this project is unique. It's the first one that we've had where we've had this kind of community engagement for the additional revenues. And I would say that's a testament also to the original Robert Crown, which had also a large commitment of funds outside of city tax dollars. So we're continuing on with that historical approach.
Coming up in the next 10 days or so, you're going to be going down to New Orleans for the National Recreation and Parks Association Annual Conference, and the City of Evanston is a finalist for their coveted Gold Award. So can you tell us what the Gold Award is and who we're competing against, and what does this mean?
All right. Yeah, I'm very excited, looking forward to it. The Gold Medal Award is the most prestigious award that's given in the parks and recreation industry. I'm proud to, again, say the City of Evanston is a finalist for Category 3, and we are competing against the City of Roswell, Georgia, I believe it's Mountain View, California, and there's one more city. But out of several hundred applications, we're in that top 4 for Category 3, which means a community of around 75,000 people. And so we're excited. We'll find out on September 25th if we're awarded that. But even being named as finalist is an absolutely honor and prestige for the community.
And what's the criteria? What are they measuring this department and all departments who apply?
Well, the gold medal is a way that you are looked at as using best practices in the parks and rec industry. It takes a look at how you go about a budget process, how you provide your programming, how do you get feedback from your community to improve your programming, and so on. And so we are excited. We take honor in getting feedback from the community. We want to be the best, and so to be the best, you have to provide what your community is asking for. And so I think we do an extremely good job of that in our department, and we'll continue to do that, and we're really excited about this.
And really, no municipal discipline has the award program. Many have award programs, but none is as comprehensive and as prestigious as the National Recreation and Parks Association. So congratulations. It's quite an honor for Evanston to be a finalist for a gold award, gold medal, and best of luck in your travels.
Thank you. And to my colleagues from the Health and Human Services Department and Administrative Department, I think everybody knows that we are the most exciting department here in the city of Evanston.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go next to a very unexciting, boring department, and that is the Evanston Police Department. Chief Richard Eddington is here. Again, remind you that we're here talking about the 2018 Evanston City budget. Chief Eddington, good evening.
Good evening, Mr. City Manager.
Chief, I believe you passed a hallmark this year of 10 years as the Chief of Police in Evanston. Congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
Looking at the slide, it gives a sense and scope of the $38 million budget, one of the largest expenditures we make in the city with those expenses, 225 full-time equivalents, most of those sworn police officers, the balance civilian police officers. Always busy times at the police department. Maybe you could just talk a little bit, what are some of the priorities that you're looking at for the coming budget year?
Well, I think the one new thing that I want to spend some time talking about is the implementation of a body camera program. We just finished up a pilot program with body cameras, and we will be at the City Council on the 25th of this month to make a request to purchase an Axon body camera system. This is a robust and complex system that includes body-worn cameras, fleet cameras for cars, and also the interview rooms at the police station. Under Illinois law, more and more crimes are covered or about to be covered by mandated recorded interviews. Currently, homicide is covered that way, but now it's going to expand to robberies, sexual assaults, and several other categories of crime. And so we've found that the Axon system is the most robust, most user-friendly, and has the storage capability that we need, and also minimizes the use of internal IT staff resources, which makes it also an attractive option.
So how much is this going to cost?
We're going to ask for $1.2 million over a 5-year period for the actual equipment and storage. That also includes several guaranteed upgrades to both the cameras and the tasers. Further, Axon's ownership of evidence.com is a significant issue in this matter because the Cook County State's Attorney has been a recognized user of that evidence storage procedure, which will make the exchange of videotapes to the prosecutor's office pretty much seamless.
So my understanding of this is that we're really not buying hardware and software, but we're licensing it. And so that we will get for approximately $250,000 a year, cameras, the software, and the sort of the auxiliary equipment necessary to have every officer have a body camera. Is that about right?
Yeah, every officer assigned to street-level duties, yes.
Okay, very good. Other challenges that you're looking forward to in the coming year? How's crime, for example? I mean, what's the crime statistics look like so far in 2017?
I have to say that the crime statistics regarding violent crime towards persons are significantly low, and that's lower than in past years. That's not all on the police department. I want to recognize the excellent work by the outreach workers that are part of Mr. Hemingway's organization, have diffused many violent ongoing situations, and I'm appreciative of that intervention. On the downside, property crimes are up. I would like to, again, take this opportunity to employ all Evanstonians to lock their cars and lock their homes. In the month of July and August, of the 75 incidents to burglaries in homes, over 80% of those domiciles and cars were unlocked. So you could really help me out by locking your stuff up.
Great. I don't see any questions, Chief, from the public here or from social media about the department. I think really from a budget perspective, the money for body cameras is important, but before you run away, let's also talk just briefly about overtime. As we spoke with Chief Scott and the fire department, this issue of having officers in place 24/7 is an expensive business. Mr. Assistant City Manager, what are your thoughts on police overtime issues, and what are we doing moving forward to address them?
Well, I think first and foremost, as I noted before, it is a combination of both your how many officers you have and what your budget for your regular salaries are, and then how many of your officers that you have employed or have authority for are actually here. If you have a lot of vacancies, as was the case from fire where we had injuries, you're going to have overtime because we want to keep service levels where they're at because of even though we have a temporary issue. In the case of police, it's definitely more, as the chief alluded to, crime issues. But when we have major crime issues, or if we have any major events, then the overtime can go up for those, and there is no savings from another source. It's just overtime. In years past, we have budgeted at a lower level for overtime, counting on salary savings, and we're reevaluating that for 2018 to take a look at what our police overtime should be. I've said this in the public in the past, certainly said it a lot in staff discussions. When we talk about police and fire overtime going up in Evanston, if you were to do an analysis across many other communities, you'd find that the overtime has not been unreasonably high in Evanston at all compared to regular wages. And again, that goes to how many people you want in your department, how many pensions you want to pay. It's a complex issue. So having the overtime go up won't all be a bad thing if we do it on a planned basis. And I've been working with the chief and his staff and the budget team to take a look at how we might adjust that overtime and how we look at total staffing so that we end up with the best mix of how many officers we've got, how often they're working, and what all those duties are. So from the macro perspective, it's going to come down to what are all the assigned duties, what do we do in the case of major events, and what's our minimum levels of staffing.
If I may, I think a recent event that I would like to point out to the labor intensity of major crimes. We had a homicide in the southern end of the city in August. That was, in terms of our investigation, a rather simple homicide. We didn't. Compared to other events where we had to serve multiple search warrants on multiple platforms of social media, this was kind of straightforward. Our partners at the CTA, that's a public entity, there's no expectation of privacy. We just make a request and we get the recordings from the CTA. In that rather simple case that we wrapped up in less than a week, it still took 800 hours, 831 man hours of work on that case. Of those 800 hours, almost 300 were overtime. And so that event drives that. Also, this sadly is not an uncommon event in the city of Evanston. Our NORTAF partners contributed many hundreds of hours to that investigation, so those hours didn't directly fall on the Evanston taxpayers. Our partners in that major crime task force contributed to the solution of that case.
And Wally, if I know we've talked about it with both police and fire, and I've tried to stick with the global issues. I don't want anyone to think that we're not addressing the specifics of budget. This is a budget meeting, and we're talking about issues of budget. So we will be looking at all of the uses of overtime and making sure we're where we need to be to provide optimal services. That's the goal as we talk about all of our different views on overtime, and police has, I don't know how many categories of overtime, but they have a lot, and we'll go through them all to make sure that we're using all staff to their best abilities and also making the best use of our resources. So that's a goal for this coming fall and into 2018 as we review the whole police department operation. That was one of our commitments.
And again, when we look at the city budget, overtime is an important component of it. What fire spends, what police spend is the lion's share of those overtime costs. Chief Eddington, thank you for your service. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager.
It is now 9 o'clock. As I had mentioned earlier, it looks like we're going to go into overtime. We have two more departments to talk with. Next is Dave Stonebeck, our Public Works Agency Director. Mr. Stonebeck, good evening.
Good evening.
Lots of exciting things happening in Public Works. Maybe talk about the structure of Public Works and the scope and breadth of what you do.
Sure. There's 4 bureaus in the Public Works Agency. Environmental Services, and they have 3 divisions there. One takes care of all the trees and the parkways and in the parks. Another one is called Greenways. They're responsible for the lawn maintenance, if you will, of all the city-owned facilities, as well as all the athletic fields and striping them and getting them ready to play. And then the third one is our Environmental Services. They oversee the refuge contracts that we have. We have employees collecting recycling in-house, and then they do the street sweeping and get involved with snow removal and leaf pickup and things like that. We have an Infrastructure Maintenance Bureau. There are 4 divisions there. One's responsible for the repair of all the street lights, the traffic signals, the parking lights, all the signs that are along the streets. Then we have a street maintenance division that's responsible for doing the patching of streets, the crack sealing, maintaining the alleys. So there's a lot of work there. We have a distribution division that's responsible for the maintenance of the water main infrastructure, the valves, the fire hydrants, and then the sewer division that's responsible for maintaining the combined sewer system, the relief sewer system, all the drainage structures and the manholes in the street. A third division is the Capital Planning and Engineering Bureau, and they're responsible for all the major capital improvement projects, all the projects that are put out by contract. A lot of those some of those we can design in-house, otherwise we have to hire an outside consultant to help us, but you just don't hire an outside consultant, you have to manage that consultant as well, make sure they understand our expectations and our standards. And then finally, there's the Water Production Bureau, which is responsible for running the water plant on Lincoln Street that serves the water to the residents of Evanston.
So let's talk a little bit about water. I think we've covered some of the new agreements. What does this mean financially for the city of Evanston, these new water agreements?
It will become a steady source of revenue for the city as they begin to procure water. It will range, beginning, I would think, about $500,000, increasing to close to $1 million per year over time. We're able to take them on without major expenses. So our largest expense, I believe, for Morton Grove Niles will be putting in a meter vault that might cost us in the neighborhood of $500,000, which will become an asset that they'll pay for over time. But that's our total capital, and after that, we have 9.5% return on rate on our existing infrastructure that they will help to pay. So that's where we make the benefit. We take the risk of building a water plant, and we get paid back for having taken that plant.
So in dollars and cents, what's the order of magnitude, do you think, especially, let's say, once Morton Grove and Niles are both online? What kind of additional revenue will the city see?
Again, I think it will start around $500,000 and grow to about $1 million a year.
And that will go for how long?
We have a 40-year contract, and they have the right.
4-0?
4-0, and they have the right to renew it for another 10 or another 20 years, basically. And I think that once they have become a customer, that very likely they'll stay a customer forever.
And I would add, for those dollars, one of the things that the Evanstonians will say, the dollars are great, but we'll also invest. So the assets that Dave is referring to, whether they're in the water plant or in the water mains that those communities will also be using, that helps us to replace those and keep those all properly maintained, because it is great to share those, and whether we put 1 gallon of water through a water main or 1 million gallons of water through a water main, it still needs to be there. So the better utilization of a lot of those facilities means a better value for all Evanston residents.
We've got a couple questions for you from the public. One of them talks about the sales to outside communities outside of Evanston. Will this require any expansion of the water plant?
No, our water treatment plant is already rated at 108 million gallons a day. In our contracts that we're negotiating with Morton Grove Niles and Lincolnwood, on the peak day, which is what you have to design for, so people will use 1.65% more than their average day demand, and based on all the communities that we provide, on a peak day will be up to about 108. So I don't think we'll get any more customers, and I think that this will just fit nicely right into what our current capacity of the water plant is. So no expansion is needed. There is always continued maintenance at the water plant. We have filters that are over 100 years old, and some that are 80 years old. So there's always some type of restoration work that's needed at the water plant to keep it in a Class A operating position.
Dave, when you say that, some people get a little concerned that we have a 100-year-old filter. Please, that's the concrete basins, and it's also we're talking about rock, sand, charcoal.
Well, and some of the rock and sand has been replaced, but
so we
the
do
concrete
replace
is 100 years old. The
we
brick
replace
structure
the filter material much more often than that,
Yes.
and do all sorts of things. But the actual vaults and things of that nature, the tanks are very old.
Let's move on to refuse. So the city council this past Monday evening got a series of staff reports from you talking about changes that we're contemplating for refuse recycling, green waste, composting. Given the lateness of hour, I don't want you to perhaps go into, we can certainly refer people back to the city council meeting materials and the tape from that. But in a general statement, what are we up to and what are we trying to accomplish?
We have to renew our existing contracts for residential refuge, for condo refuge, and for yard waste. Those contracts expire at the end of October this year, so we need to sign new agreements. We're looking to do that for 5 years. A new thing would be able to provide food scrap pickup voluntarily to commercial properties, and so we're kind of setting up a franchise for that. And then the other thing that we're looking at is to have city employees collect recyclable goods from all apartment buildings, 6 units and larger, and that would be a new service. We're running a pilot program now, but it's not reaching all the units at this time.
And I believe you're having a community meeting next week, which will also be televised. Tell us about that.
On Wednesday, September 20th at 7 o'clock, we'll be talking about all of our new contracts, what staff is recommending. We'll look at what it costs to do that, the expenses, and then what our current charges bringing in revenue, which is lower than what our expenses are. Right now, it's a subsidy by the general fund, a transfer from the general fund to the solid waste fund to make sure we stay solvent.
And I think that's an important point, that we're not looking to raise rates to pay for police officers. We're looking to adjust rates in order to cover our expenses associated with these services.
Yes, absolutely. It would just be for the sanitation services.
Another big part of your department is capital projects. There are probably 3 on many people's minds, and maybe you can just give a quick update on each of them. One is Fountain Square. Where are we at and where are we going?
Fountain Square is under construction now. It is on schedule. It's barely hanging on to the schedule, but the work south of Davis Street is anticipated to be completed by mid-October. That plaza area will be complete. The street will be resurfaced. On the north side, we're hoping that the sidewalk area, the pedestrian areas outside the fenced area will be all complete, and the paving through that area as well. We had some issues with getting the permit needed for the zero-depth fountain, but it's still considered a pool, even though there's no water, so you have to get a permit from the Illinois Department of Health, and that took a long time to obtain. And then the glass monument wall, we were very strict about the sampling that we had to see with that. When we got our first sample block in, we noticed something that we didn't like and wanted to make sure that that was correct, and so they're redoing it, and that's delayed the delivery of the second sample, which we should get at the end of this year, but then it will be too late to install. If we approve it, it will be too late to install the full wall this winter, and so they would come back next spring to complete the fountain and the memorial wall.
So everything south of the main Fountain Plaza will be in place. The piece north will wait till next year.
Yes.
Finally, next Emerson Ridge Green Bay, project's done. Certainly there's been concern in the community that the traffic's not moving perhaps as efficiently as everyone would like it to be. What are we doing to address that?
Well, we've taken several measures, and the last thing that has yet to be implemented is a big post-type sign that will be up as you're coming north on Ridge/Green Bay. It will more clearly delineate which lane you should be in if you want to turn left or going west on Emerson, if you want to go north on Green Bay Road, or if you want to go north on Ridge Avenue. So that will help that traffic there. A lot of it is just people are running red lights as well, and in that type of configuration, if you run a red light trying to get on Emerson and Green Bay, you're actually blocking southbound Ridge Avenue traffic, and then you block southbound Ridge Avenue traffic, and that backs up, and then they get across Emerson Street, and then people can't go west on Emerson Street. So it's a during the rush hour is the most challenging time. We also feel it's more challenging right now because Sheridan Road is under construction, and we believe that approximately 12,000 more cars are traveling through that intersection between Sheridan Road and Davis Street and the Fountain Square things. People are staying on Emerson, and they're staying on Green Bay Road and not utilizing Sheridan as much, and so we have more traffic in that intersection, and that it isn't designed to handle that much traffic. We hope it will relax some when Sheridan Road gets done, which is the next major project. That project is moving along well. We have a very good contractor on it. We've had challenges with the state shutdown that we lost 2 weeks of construction there. And then we've had challenges with conflicts with buried underground utilities that were improperly located. They're supposed to be in the parkway. They're actually out in the street, and then they're supposed to be 30 inches deep, and they're not 30 inches deep. So when we excavate to put the road base in, we've had 2 gas leaks. We've made NICOR lower gas mains. That takes time. So we're going to complete the area between Chicago Avenue and Lincoln Street on Sheridan Road this fall, but it will be a month or 6 weeks later than what we had initially anticipated.
A lot happening in the Public Works Agency. Thank you, Mr. Stonebeck. Appreciate your
You're welcome.
service, appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Last, we tried to do this in alphabetical order, so you'll notice we skipped over L, and that's the Evanston Public Library, and Karen Danzig-Lyons, the library director, is here. Karen is coming from a library board meeting herself this evening, hence the reason we were a little late with having you, so thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We talked a little bit at the top of the program about the library being a little bit different in that you're appointed by a library board that's appointed by the mayor. And so you are not a city manager department, that you're a separate closely coordinating department, but operates separately from the remaining city departments. But you have a budget process, and that's ongoing. So why don't you talk a little bit about your challenges for the coming year? Maybe talk a little bit about what your board did tonight, if they've approved a budget, haven't approved a budget, and what those next steps will be.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. We had our public hearing tonight on our budget. Because our budget folds up into the city's process, we're always a little bit ahead in terms of our meetings and our deliberations. So the board is, the trustees will be voting on a budget and a revenue package in the next couple of months, but nothing was approved tonight. We were just discussing what 2018 will bring to us. We are continuing to work on my goal of producing 25% of our programs and bringing our services, 25% of our services outside the walls of the library. So we go to where our families and our children are and bring our services and programs and books to them. To help us with that, we are going to be writing a grant for a second book bike. We have a book bike now that you'll see out and about in the community. We also are going to be buying what I'm calling a mobile library. So it's not a bookmobile. When we think of bookmobile, I picture a bus and we walk in and there's rows of books and we select. That's not what this is. This will allow us to bring pop-up library service. So we'll be bringing computers, we will be bringing books, we will be bringing programming, and of course our wonderful staff. But it will help us bring services in a predictable way to areas of the city where we don't have facilities right now, or facilities that we share and bring programs to. Our wonderful Parks and Recreation Community Services group is such an important partner for us. And once again, we brought our summer reading program to all of the parks, and the children read every day. Reading and preventing the summer slide is an important part of what we do over the summer, but I can't
Visual aid,
I
go
can't
ahead.
help myself. I have to bring props. This book is one that we're very interested in, 30 million words, and it talks about the importance of early learning for our children, so that when our children enter kindergarten, they've already heard 30 million words in order to be prepared to learn. So our story times and our programs and our books help families and help children learn and grow and develop their approach to learning, and hopefully that it's fun and exciting. We also work over the summer very closely with rising kindergartners. The school identifies children that aren't quite at where they should be in terms of developmental, social, and letter recognition, and so we have a program called ABC Boosters, which I'm very proud of, that we hire teens and we teach them how to work with children and read, and they have one-on-one time with children, rising kindergartners over the summer. Consistently, every child, whether it's in English or Spanish, we demonstrate that they learn letter recognition and are prepared to go to school. Teens as young as 14, this can be their first job experience, and so there's coaching about what it means to have a job and to work with children. We continue to look at how we provide our services in an equitable manner to a diverse city, including everyone. And that takes many forms for us in terms of programming, in terms of collection, in terms of opportunities to come together and talk about your needs. We at the library are here to help you reach your aspirations. That's what we do. We listen and we help, and we try and have fun while we're doing it. So I don't know about exciting other departments or comments about how we want to label our work. I think I have the best job in the city. I work for a wonderful community with wonderful people, and we have fun, and we learn, and we try and grow and help. And our programs are all at no fee. I won't say free, because the taxpayers pay for the work, but we don't charge fees. And so coming up October 6th, 7th, and 8th, I invite you to join us for a weekend of storytelling. We bring in both professional, internationally known storytellers to share stories and music. We highlight Northwestern students and high school students, and we let adults stand up if they want to tell their story. And we talk about the importance in a modern culture of having an oral tradition. Sharing our stories, listening to each other helps us build community, and that's an important part of what we do.
Great. So, next steps on your budget, the budget is approved by the library board of trustees. It then goes to the city council, and the city council approves the gross dollar amount. They don't approve a line item, they just approve the allocation, the single budget number, correct?
And
Correct.
then the tax line.
And then the tax
And then the
levy. And the
tax levy.
library, over the last several years, has had its own line on the tax bill, separate from the city's general operations. So the library fund model, as it's known in Illinois. And so as people look at their tax bill, they know exactly what portion of their property taxes is going to the library. Is that correct?
That's correct, and I hope that our citizens feel that we give good value for your dollar.
Great. Karen Danzig Lyons, thank you very much.
My pleasure, thank you.
So we have gone through all of the various departments. We had prepared some summary tables, which I think we will leave for folks if they wish to go online. We'll make this available under our budget section. Maybe we could just go to the last slide of a calendar. And maybe before we talk.
Can we show one property tax? It was a new one.
Okay, there's a new property tax slide the chief financial
Which
officer
one
wants
was
to
it?
show.
It's going the wrong way. One that you don't see all the time. We always end up with the rates, and so because of the reassessment,
Right.
we went down in a rate, which means nothing to a resident when your property went in a value from 100,000 to 200,000.
Full screen.
Thank you. If the rate is totally eclipsed by how much your property value went up, it does not help you any. But I thought it was really important to point out that, the city we continue to drop, I think it's the next slide, is it not?
What there? 16.63 from 17.54.
So we continue to drop as a part of the total, and part of that is this next slide that I did this once several years ago for one of the aldermen at one of their ward meetings. People don't realize the entire amount paid by all Evanstonians for all taxing jurisdictions, $240 million. And of that, the city of Evanston is 40. So that's how you get to that 16.6 number. And this, by the way, this is not the actual, this is not the city's ordinance levy. This is what was paid. So the 3.6 is higher than our budget set of 2.4% because we just had more people pay their taxes in 16 than in 15. So it looks like we increased taxes. What's really going on is we had a higher collection rate in 16. So I think that's a piece of information. That's what this presentation has been about tonight, a lot of information. This is one that we haven't had anywhere in any one of our documents, so I thought it was a good one to share, and we will keep it going forward.
So there's a couple of questions that we haven't picked up. One is from Facebook regarding sustainability. Will the city be installing more car charging stations? The answer is yes, but we have no particular time frame to do that. We have them at our parking decks. We have them here at the Civic Center. I think we're going to evaluate over the next 12 months where it makes sense to put additional charging stations. A few additional affordable housing questions. As Ms. Leonard said, the city's inclusionary housing ordinance gives the developer the choice of either providing units in a development or paying a cash fee. And the question was, why don't the developers provide the units in their building? I think there's multiple reasons for that. I mean, there are communities that are looking at their policies to say, should they switch them so that the developers can only provide the units and not provide the dollars. So I think that is a market question and ultimately a city council question. I think a question about the development issues in general, about the buildings that we're seeing, that none of them are affordable. I think, again, all projects of a certain size are providing money for affordable housing. So while the projects themselves may not be affordable, they are really the only single revenue source that we're bringing in to provide affordable units. So that's important. And then someone named Ann Rainey posted on Facebook about the Peckish Pigs building property tax, that the county tax records show that Peckish Pig paid in excess of $40,000 in property taxes, and Ward 8 over $11,000. So I think that's important information to have as well.
And the city does pay those and then is reimbursed from the rents.
That's
So-
correct.
So this is, some are concerned that, it's a public building or it's hurting the TIF. We've been getting tax revenues. So, while Alderman Rainey referenced those, some of the smaller ones also are in the same situation. If there's a for-profit use, thanks to law, thanks to economic development and the alderman, we work on the agreements to say whether or not they will pay the taxes, but not whether or not taxes will be paid. If it's a for-profit use and qualifies to pay taxes, then it pays taxes. The city does not get a pass on that. The county would not allow it.
So that concludes our formal presentation. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the questions that we received here and over social media. So some parting comments, Mr. Assistant City Manager. I think we've done a good job of reviewing where we're at. I think there was a question midpoint of the evening about this idea of rosy. I don't think I would characterize what we've talked about as rosy, but I think it's been important that we've talked about the mechanics of this, that the component parts of how we spend our money, the revenues that we have, are still very strong. Would you agree with that?
Certainly, and we used a strong term a couple of times. We talk about structural problems with our budget. That's a strong term to say that you've got a structural problem, but I want to put a little context in that. What we're talking about this year is for our general fund, we might have a structural issue of 2 to 3%. 2 to 3%. That's not a budget that is our operating budget, our general fund that has a 20% structural problem. We don't have enough revenues to pay for our services. We're talking about an order of magnitude of 2 to 3%. It's a big fund. That's still $3 million that we're going to have to balance. But I'll put the glass half full. We have a general fund budget that is 97% structurally sound. That sounds a lot better than saying we have a 3% deficit that we're working on. And again, the general fund is just one of 40 almost funds that the city has, and we manage all of those, and they all have different functions and purposes. We don't spend a lot of time on our enterprise funds because water, sewer, and parking are rock-solid business operations that work very well. So we don't talk about them that much. And we did talk about the TIF. So I would say our focus again will be on our operations, and we will have some very big discussions over service levels and on how we want our general services in that general fund to be provided next year. That's where our focus will be, and that's why this is an important evening, so everyone understands the background of our operations and can give the council input.
And really, the purpose of coming together tonight was to get input. We appreciate the input that we received. People can still reach out to us through all the various mechanisms we've discussed tonight, through Facebook, through 311. There's a form online that people can provide information. We really want to get that information because this is all leading to a proposed budget that I'll be submitting to the City Council on October 6th. The final slide gives you a calendar of how members of the public can continue to provide input on our budget process. Once the proposed budget is presented on October 6th, the City Council will start its budget deliberations on October 16th at 7 o'clock. At each of the council meetings, there will be opportunities for public comment. The next opportunity will be a week later, on Monday, October the 23rd at 7 o'clock. And then on Saturday, October the 28th, under Illinois law, we're required to have a formal public hearing on the budget, so that will occur on Saturday, October 28th at 9 a.m. We'll also have a public hearing on our truth in taxation, which is providing the public listing of the various tax levies that will be proposed for the coming year. Then on Monday, November 6th, will be an additional opportunity for residents to provide comment, and then it's anticipated that the City Council will adopt the 2018 budget on Monday, November the 27th. So there's lots of opportunities to be involved. The purpose of tonight really was to share information and to get your feedback. I'd like to once again thank the City Department Directors that were here. Thank you for your time. From our budget team, Alex Thorpe, Kate Lewis-Lakin, Kimberly Richardson, from our community engagement staff, Martha Logan and Patrick Denigan, my companion here, Mr. Lyons, thank you for your time. But most of all, thank you, the residents of Evanston, for spending 2.5 hours with us this evening to talk about the budget. We appreciate your interest and your attention this evening, and good evening.